Sri Gurubhyo Namaha, Sri Yajnarayanaaya Namaha. With Shiva Sankalpa, today we are here on Atharva Forum to discuss with Dr. Harsh Satya, a PhD in Exact Humanities, whose thesis is towards revitalizing diversity, a study of the traditional Jajmani system in India. This has got a great deal to do with the study of what is Indian village and the way in which village is constituted, as well as an understanding about what makes for the vitality and the liveliness of the traditional Indian village community. It is our pleasure that Dr. Harsh is with us, and we shall first get down to the question of what constitutes a village, grama in Sanskrit, and let us learn more and see where this leads us to. We shall be in a conversation and we shall raise questions to learn more in the process of our understanding about Indian village and the Jajmani system. A specific book on this was written in the 1930s by one Englishman by name William H. Weiser, whose reference also shall be given to you in this section. Harsh, could you please address us on what constitutes a village in the Indian thought and how is it translated in reality?
Okay, thank you, Pranav. I'm happy to see you after a long time. And thank you, Athar, for inviting me on your forum to speak. Much has been written on Indian village and the life in Indian village. However, I thought it is important for us to have some working definition of a village is. For example, I have lived in Delhi all my life, and where I lived, it's surrounded by villages, the Delhi villages. But they are so urbanized that it is wrong to call them a village anymore. And so I always had this question that if you're in a village, how do you know it's a village? What is it that tells you it is a village? And what changes in a village for it ceases to be a village? Maybe it becomes an urban center. So I thought it's important for us to at least ponder over this question. A village, what is a village? Or a gram, what is a gram? I can't say I have a final answer to that question. However, if I take the words of one of my mentors, Sri Ravindra Sharma of Adilabad, he used to define village as a place which is able to meet two requirements, two primary requirements. One, in his words, village should be able to provide ahar ki suraksha for all the people who live in the village. That is a security towards livelihood. And two, a village should be able to provide kaam ka gaurav, in his words. That is, according to me, dignity of labor, whatever people are doing. These two requirements, that is ahar ki suraksha and kaam ka gaurav, are requirements for a village to be called a village. However, I also believe I would also like to add one more aspect to a village, which is that a village is required to provide ahar ki suraksha and kaam ka gaurav. But once that is ensured, a village is also required to provide a platform for people to gather and contemplate together. And contemplate on issues of dharma, on the various challenges which dharma sankats pose in front of us, and how these can be resolved. So I believe that traditionally Indian villages have been a place of collective contemplation amongst its inhabitants on issues of dharma and adharma. And this collective contemplation is possible when people feel assured about their livelihood, feel assured about their uh, respect in the community. So I think these three aspects define a village. It should be able to provide ahar ki suraksha, it should be able to provide kaam ka gaurav, and it should be able to provide contemplative space on dharma.
Would this remain with respect to the contemplative space, or also is it a place where the contemplation can move to action as well?
Yes, contemplation always necessarily moves towards action. And of course, contemplation is an ongoing process, it goes on for generations, but actions start immediately. And uh, yes, collective contemplation then, in a way, results into some kind of a collective action in the village, which I believe is uh, in the shape of primarily customs and rituals. I believe that in a village, um, a large part of action happens in the form of rituals, and these rituals are often reformed. Often, new rituals are designed as per the times. But what the rituals ensure is that conflicting actions don't happen, or they are minimized. Uh, so I think somebody who wants to study an Indian village should also take rituals very seriously, as to the kind of stability rituals can provide to a community living together.
Would it be the case that the ritual that you speak of would include yajna?
Yes, yes. I think the primary motivation behind a village organization is of that of yagya. Yagya, we all know, is a form of a collective action full of rituals. And just like a yagya has a purohit, so does a village has a purohit. And the purohit's responsibility, I believe, is to take the hit, the well-being of the poor, of the collective in mind, and thus design rituals which have a collective, which keeps the collective well-being is its concern. And so, in that way, Yagya is the inspiration behind the village organization, and Purohit plays a very key role in collective actions in a village.
So that is, the Purohit shall lead the way forward to decide for people as to the way in which they need to go about their rituals towards following and practicing dharma in their own life.
Yes, a Purohit is somebody who leads the way, who also keeps a check, he also corrects if some undesired action happens. Purohit is somebody who has the Duradrashti, he has the collective well-being in mind, and he is expected to know that certain action may seem beneficial in the short term, but in the long term it may be counterproductive, or such an action may be beneficial to an individual, but to the collective it's counterproductive. Such concerns is what the Purohit is expected to have, and therefore a common image of a Purohit is somebody who keeps, telling you what to do, what not to do, constantly keeps poking you. That's because he has a collective hit in the mind. It's like a parent in the family who keeps telling the children constantly what to do, what not to do. Yeah.
So to get to the topic that we are discussing on the Indian village and the Jajmani system, Jajmani sounds so similar to the Sanskrit word yajamana. Is there a relation?
Yes, Jajmani is a colloquial way of calling a Yajman. A Yajman is somebody on whose behalf a yajna is being performed. And uh, the benefits of the yajna is enjoyed by the Yajman. Now, in my research, what I have concluded is that, and one will also find a reference of it from Weiser's work, that in a Jajmani system, um everybody sits on the seat of Yajmana at some point or the other. So one can say that one of the tasks of Purohit is to ensure that every family becomes a Jajmana at some point or the other. And although this is little strange to hear, because the notion we have in a village is that there are some people who are always Jajmans, and then there are the rest of the people in the village who are always service providers. Weiser calls them Kamwala. But that is not the case. Even Weiser has written this, that each in turn is a master and each in turn is a service provider. So I think that's the job of Purohit in a Jajmani system, that everybody gets to play the Jajmana at some point or the other.
The natural question that comes is, who are the people who play the role of Yajamana? Is it that any common person, or say, is there any classification amongst the Yajamanas? In what manner does this happen? What are the types of yajnas that happen? Is there a similarity in all the types of yajnas?
So actually, when I say Yajna, okay, I should clarify this. All action, all activities, all professional activities that is happening in the village. For example, if I'm a potter and I'm making a pot, or if I'm a farmer and I'm growing crops, or if I'm a weaver and I'm weaving cloth, all these actions are a form of yajna, are part of yajna. And when I make a pot, I am not making it for my consumption. I am keeping in mind the needs, the requirements of my Jajman families. So I have a number of Jajman families in the village. For their benefit, for their requirement, I'm making pots. So I have a family of judge. I have a weaver family who is my Jajman. I make pots for them. I have a farmer family who's a Jajman. I make pots for them. So like that, everyone, the professional work one is doing for the fulfillment of the other person. This other person is the Jajman. Similarly, I am the Jajman of some other families. So I am a potter. I am a Jajman of some farmer family. I'm a potter. I'm a Jajman of some weaver family. I'm a potter. I'm a Jajman of some ironsmith, Lohar family. And all these people are putting their effort, keeping my requirements in consideration. So I am playing both the roles at the same time. I'm also playing the Jajman to other families, and I also have Jajmans for whom I'm producing something, manufacturing something. So everybody is a Jajman.
Uh, everybody is a Yajamana in different yajnas or the same yajna?
So each of these action is a yajna. If I'm a potter and I'm making a pots, then I have Jajmans to whom I cater to. You may be a farmer who's producing crops. For you, I am the Jajman in this action of, in this yajna of uh, called farming. So at the time of the harvest, when you have harvested the crop, uh, you don't take the crop with you to your house. You invite people like me who are your Jajmanas to come to your field. We take away a share of the produce. And after your Jajmanas have taken the share of the produce, the remaining is what you take back home. Similarly, when I make pots keeping in mind all my Jajmanas. and the remaining time I have, I make pots for myself, my own consumption.
Natural question that arises is what is the proportion of this give and take? Is there a kind of harmonious way in which this happens, or is it in any sense, say, what some would call as the exploitative village system? What is the sense in which this this relation or the interrelation happens?
So this proportion is something which is negotiated. As a potter and as a farmer, we can negotiate how much portion of produce I will take after the end of the season or after the end of the year, and throughout the year, on what all occasions I'll provide you pots for what all purposes. And over the time, this negotiation kinds of stabilizes. So it may not be the case that every year we are sitting to negotiate our proportions, our exchanges. But yes, in times of distress, if there is a failure of rainfall, or if there is some uh, inadvertent activity, at that time we can always renegotiate it. But over the time, these negotiations stabilize, and through customs, we know how much part of your produce will I take as my hissa or my share, and as a potter, on what all occasions I will provide pots to you for what purpose. So these negotiations are more or less settled. One must assume that there is a stability in these negotiations, otherwise one of us will walk away from this. One of us will not uh, you know adhere to it. This assumption that one of us is stuck in this negotiation and is unable to walk away, wants to walk away, but a lot of violence prevents one to walk away. I don't give much value to this assumption. I would rather give value to an assumption that our negotiations are stabilized over time. Our negotiations are providing ahar ki suraksha to both of us, and therefore I am not walking away. In fact, you mentioned Weiser's book. In Weiser's book, he does write this, that although the Weiser study is in a village called Karimpur, which is now a UP, Western UP, and the nearest town to Karimpur is Mainpuri. So Weiser raises this question that although Mainpuri may have better economic prospects to offer, yet nobody is walking away and breaking the Jajmani and walking away to Mainpur. And Weiser concludes that this is not because of any pressure or any any violent force which is stopping them walk away. He's saying that the overall economic value of being in Jajmani in Karimpur is far greater than people choosing to walk away uh, and find some job in Mainpuri. And he makes a list of what he calls concessions. There are 17 concessions as part of our negotiation, which makes the overall Jajmani relationships much more economically attractive for one to stay in that. Of course, Weiser's concern is largely economic concern. So he is providing an economic reason for people to not walk away. I believe there are more reasons for people to not walk away from the Jajmani relationships. But to answer our questions, over a period of time, our negotiations have largely settled, but we always renegotiate them depending uh, on the current context.
One question that comes naturally is that it appears that Jajmani provides a great degree of protection to the families in the village. And that protection is something that offers the security, not just in terms of the economic security, but possibly the social security as well. And that seems to be a kind of reason why one wouldn't want to go out of it, even though there are better opportunities. But would it not be the case that if in case one is not, one finds the city bred or the urbanized world much more attractive, then would one not move over from the system which is at work in the village?
Yes, people would move over, and I'm sure people did move over. Uh, but you see, I think this is both ways. There would be people in city who would move back to the village, because although the city provides the economic opportunities, but there is something still which the city is not able to provide. Even today, amongst our friends, we know of cases of people who have moved back from America to India and then from city to the village, choosing to live so-called less economic prosperous life because they find something of value. So this movement from the village to the city and from city to the village, I believe, is always happening. uh, Today this movement is happening on a very large scale. uh, that is an exceptional situation, but normally I assume this movement is happening to good proportion. In fact, I also assume that the movement is also happening between um, settled lifestyle and ghumantu lifestyle, people who are nomadic. And this movement is also happening between forest lifestyle and rural or urban lifestyle. There are people who are choosing to move to the forests, and there are people who are choosing to move from the forest to the villages or to the urban centers. So this movement, I believe, keeps happening. However, uh, I would want to uh, mention one important thing here. People like Weiser and other scholars, they have uh, paid great deal of attention to the economic reasons, the social reasons for one to either stay or to move out. I believe, although they are important reasons, but they are not enough. I think one important reason for people to continue to stay is the rich contemplative space which a village provides or provided. It no longer provides. And I think much credit of this goes to what we can call people of Bhiksha Vritti, or people who are occupied with performances of dance, of dramas, of puppet shows, of singers. Uh, these artist communities, they build a cultural uh, atmosphere in the village, which is very rich, or which was very rich. And I would like to believe that this was the primary attraction for somebody to continue being staying in a village. I remember when my grandmother moved to Delhi for the first time, because my grandfather had taken up a job in Delhi. It was a very comfortable life for her. The city life, in comparison to the village life, was very comfortable materially. There was electricity, there was mechanized uh, tools in the kitchen to work with, mixie and grinder and all those things. But she did not really like moving here because the city life did not have any contemplative space for her. And she used to always complain that there is no one here whom with I can come and discuss things, or who can come to me and discuss things. And so it became a very lonely life for her. I think that is a primary reason for people to stay in the village as part of the Jajmani system, because it provided rich contemplative life. And I think one of the important reasons for its disintegration is when it stopped providing contemplative life, or when the contemplative life became very poor. That is one serious uh, degradation that I believe has happened in Indian village, which is not much talked about. I think one of the greatest tragedies in the last 100 years in India is the downfall, uh, the dispossessment of the Bhikshavritti communities, of the artist communities. And uh, people like me should investigate more into that, the role the Bhikshavritti has played in the Samaj, and the reasons why the Bhikshavritti got dispossessed in last 150 years.
There are actually a flurry of questions that come to my mind in the context of the points that you mentioned. First point, you began with potters, weavers, and mentioning these professions, which in traditionally we would call them as kulavrittis and the jatis. And these are actually, say, vocations which are hereditary. And further, you referred to bhikshavritti. And in fact, one thing that comes to my mind is that when one speaks of a prosperous society of yore, one speaks of a society which is subhiksha. So that where, say, one always got bhiksha, and there's a plenty of bhiksha which is available. So in modern times, of course, you do find that the concept of bhiksha itself has turned out to be begging, which actually, as per Beggar Act across the country in different states, you treat them as prisoners and so on. So that is a degradation, certainly. But the question remains that, say, the ideation behind these vrittis that you speak of, how many vrittis are there? How many types of vrittis are there? And in what manner could one understand these jatis and their relation to these vrittis? And what is the sense in which, say, we speak of Jajmani today? When should it be seen as something which is a distant dream of yore, which has no relevance today? Or is it that we still have those communities present which are being neglected, which require to be taken care of because they provide a path for future?
Okay. See, as far as whether there is relevance of Jajmani today or not, I think is an important concern, but let's take it up separately. But let me just address this question of how many vrittis are there and what is the relation between a vritti and a jati. So there are three vrittis, major vrittis. One is called the karma vritti. This is a vritti where people put their labor on inanimate stuff. So if I put my labor on, let's say, a wood, that is a carpenter, or if I put my labor on, let's say, clay, that is a potter, or if I put my labor on cloth, the weaver, if I put my labor on iron, the ironsmith, the goldsmiths. So such kind of people come under karma vritti. People who put their labor on inanimate stuff. We can call them manufacturers. The second kind is called Vaishya vritti. It's also called Varta vritti. Varta means exchange. Like Vartalap means exchange of alap. So Varta vritti people are people who put their labor in exchanging the fruits of somebody else's labor. Like most commonly a bania. A bania is somebody who's responsible for exchanging what you as a carpenter may have produced or you as a potter may have produced. So within the village, the exchange is direct between a potter and a farmer. But outside the village boundaries, we need somebody who would take your pots and provide it to somebody in a distant village, and in return provide you the benefits of that exchange. So that's the bania. Interestingly, the farmer is also part of Varta Vritti because we believe that the plant is not an inanimate stuff, it's an animate stuff. It's the plant is the one who's making the grain. The farmer is only managing the water, when to give water, when not to give water, and then harvest it. Interestingly, many of the people who work with the animals, the shepherds, the cow herders, the camel herders, such people also come under Varta Vritti, because it's not the shepherd who's making the wool or it's not the shepherd, or it's not the cow herder who's making the milk. It's the cow who's making the milk. The cow herder is only exchanging the milk and providing it to the others. So the Karma Vritti people and the Varta Vritti people together are responsible for the prosperity of the village, of the community. They make stuff and they provide stuff to each other, to everyone. The third vritti is of Bhiksha Vritti people. people who put their labor on intangible stuff like knowledge, like stories, like songs. Um, because these people are putting their energy, their labor on intangible stuff which can't be measured. Therefore, one cannot, they cannot negotiate the value of their labor. So so the way of living for them is to live on bhiksha. They provide some service. Maybe they organize a drama in your village. They perform the drama for 7 days, and once the drama is completed, people give bhiksha to them as per their capacity, individual capacity. Such people are called bhikshavritti people, and they were a significant portion of the population in India. Uh, uh, it's difficult for me to say what is the proportion of the population, but it's a significant portion of population in India. In my thesis, I have referred to Professor Jayadhir Tirumal Rao's work, who compiled a list of 74 such jatis in the United Andhra region. Uh, so in the United Andhra region, even today, uh, uh, I believe one can find 70, 75 different jatis who belong to Bhikshavritti, who perform some kind of a uh, uh, drama or a song or a painting, and in return, people give them bhiksha and they live on bhiksha. And like you said, bhiksha is a very different idea from the idea of begging. Somebody who lives on bhiksha has been always considered to be a, a very high way of living life, because culturally we have believed that accumulation of wealth is a very low way of living life, and somebody who need not accumulate anything but just simply live on bhiksha is certainly living a high way of life.
In fact,
So
maybe it is good to bring out that Tyagaraja lived on Uncha Vritti, where one of the bhiksha forms, and that is regarded as the best of all the ways to earn a living.
yes.
Yeah,
One thing, let me just mention here, like in Weiser's book, which we've been talking about, and it's not the case with Weiser, it's the case with many other scholars. They have noticed families of Bhiksha Vritti in the village. Like Weiser has made a note of a family of Tawayaf. He calls it the dancing girl. He has made a note of the family of Fakir. He calls them Muslim beggars, which is quite a wrong translation. So he has noted down presence of such people in his study, but he doesn't know what they are there for. So he acknowledges their presence. He acknowledges that people give them alms, on special occasions when they get married or when somebody's child is born. But he is not very sure why they are present there. And of course, one must remember that he's studying the system in 1920s, when much of Jajmani is already under decline. And and one serious decline, as I mentioned, has been the decline of Bhiksha Vritti.
What does one actually lose out when you do not have people who are living on bhiksha? One way that I have come to learn, and there are several references as well, you do notice that the lack of a Harikathakara, somebody who does a Yakshagana, would as well create a society which does not have an appreciation of the Saundarya, of the rasa that is there in life. And you expect that that kind of a society which has the aesthetic relish, which it can as well enjoy, is going to be more joyous than otherwise. If you could as well say, throw a little more light on the notion of Saundarya Drishti that you mentioned in your thesis. And also, you seem to have missed the question on Jati part. So please do as well.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, yes. So, uh, uh, this question, see, these are all three, there are various different categorizations, jati, vritti, varna, and other forms. I believe one mistake which happened in the colonial time was this mapping between jati and varna. I think a better mapping can be between jati and vritti. I think all the jatis can be uh, accurately seen to be part of one vritti or the other. Uh, so, for example, people whose jati involves them working on inanimate stuff f- form part of the karm vritti, the carpenter, the lohar, the charmkar, the kumhar, the bunkar, the weaver. Then people whose work involves working on the animate stuff like plants, like farmers, they all form the Vaishyavritti, the Vartavritti, the shepherds, the farmers, the cattle herders, and then people who are involved with knowledge, with arts, uh, they constitute Bhikshavritti. So one can see what all jatis are there, what all work they are involved with, and then one can neatly place them in the three vrittis. However, uh, one need not even do that. One need not do this overlapping between vritti and jati. Similarly, one need not do an overlap between varna and jati. I don't think that's necessary. That's one. The more important question is, what did we lose by the collapse of Bhikshavritti? And as you rightly say, that Bhikshavritti has been a source of our aesthetic sense. Not only that, Bhikshavritti has been a source of our sense of past. Uh, uh, and like I said initially, Bhikshavritti have been uh, responsible for creating contemplative spaces in the village. By the collapse of Bhikshavritti, what we see today in the village is a total collapse of any contemplative space, or whatever contemplative space that remains is not worried about issues of dharma and adharma. It is important for us to note that in the village we not only have a contemplative space, but that contemplative space is focused on the issues of dharma dharma and not on issues of uh, wealth creation or wealth consumption. So a collapse of Bhikshavritti, I believe, has uh, resulted in the collapse of contemplative space, and more importantly, the concerns for dharma have largely vanished from our public uh, contemplation today, yeah, both in villages and in urban centers. This, I believe, has been the greatest loss as a result of loss of Bhikshavritti.
As a student of Dharmashastra, I thought I should make a few points, since the points that you make about jati, vritti, and varna, maybe one should also add the term caste in current times. When it comes to the kind of quote unquote conflation that one might speak of, if at all one keeps in mind that the sense of varna and the sense of the karma associated with each varna is intended towards the performance of a yajna. And you find, say, the references to yajna in terms of the entire Vaidika Vangmaya to specifically refer to, Gita Acharya would say, Tasmat Sarvagatam Brahma Nityam Yajye Pratishtitam, to indicate that the entire cosmos is actually, say, erected on the very idea of yajna. So one certain kind of thought that did come to me is that when people speak of varna and jati separately, the ideation would be that you could possibly say deny the possibility of the relation of birth and corresponding link to the sense of one's vritti. Whereas Gita Acharya certainly pointed to both Varna Sankarya as well as Karma Sankarya as things to be avoided. That is a point which, as on today, in practice, it may not be happening. But in principle, as well as what Shastra says, that remains the case. In fact, there is a specific instance of Varnasankarya section in Anushasana Parva where Bhishmacharya says, Chaturvarnyasya karmani chaturvarnyancha kevalam asrijat sahi yajnarthe purvameva prajapatihi. So it is meant in terms of the pursuance of yajna. And one does find that the nature of yajnas conveyed for Brahmanas are different from Kshatriyas, are different from the yajna for Vaishya, is again different from that of a Shudra. That Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra are each enabled to perform a yajna of their own accord and correspondingly attain what is the fruit that is commonly required and desired by all, which is moksha. That space to actually engage in that is what Grama provided for village. In fact, the possibility of achara to be followed, the customs that you mentioned, there's actually a saying that says, Pattanat Padam Acharam, in the sense that you actually move to a Pattana, into a city, then the following of achara itself is no longer possible. You hinted at that when you actually referred to your grandmother's, say, the lack of or the sense of displacement, in spite of all the comforts that one might find in the case of move to a city. In such a scenario, today, of course, there are so many different authors who keep writing about caste and formations in their own respective senses. But if we are to keep the focus on yajna as the kind of goal towards which these variety of formations are present in the society, the belief, of course, is that they are created by Prajapati. But even if we actually say that they are there for the performance of yajna, how would you see that this Bhikshavritti enabled the memory of these yajnas of various kinds to be performed? Maybe if you could give an example, that would be great.
Scholars have recognized the presence of people of Bhikshavritti in villages. But what their role is in the village community, I think is not well appreciated. One must obviously keep in mind that most scholarly studies on Jajmani system have been in an era when it is already collapsed and is being dispossessed under the colonial rule. So, of course, most of these studies which they have seen, they have already seen a dispossessed state of Bhikshavritti. And while reading many of these books, one should always keep in mind whether the book is describing the condition of village in the colonial era or before the British came to India. Now, the question of Bhikshavritti. The question of Bhikshavritti, I think, should begin from a more fundamental question: what is the relationship between art and society? Because all these Bhikshavritti people are associated with some kind of an art form or the other. And in India, in traditional India, we have seen a rich culture of art traditions, many art traditions, painting, sculpting, drama, puppet shows, storytelling, singing. We all know of those things. So I think to appreciate the role of Bhikshavritti in an Indian village, in the Indian society, one must begin with this primal question: what is the relationship between art and society? And to answer your question specifically, what the Bhikshavritti people they are doing, they are providing to an ordinary person uh, uh, access to philosophical thoughts like what is moksha, what is dharma, through various art forms. So, for example, people who perform drama, who perform, let's say, the drama, the story of Ramayana, through the performance of this story, they're trying to make people familiar with the idea of dharma, adharma, of maryada. When what all kinds of maryadas are there? When does a maryada get violated? You know, so through storytelling, they are creating a contemplative space on these philosophical concepts: dharma, dharma, maryada, niti, so many of these things. And one very well-known scholar, M.N. Srinivas, uh, he has observed and acknowledged this process, that the Bhikshavritti people, through their performances, create familiarity with Sanskrit concepts amongst masses. He has called this the process of Sanskritization. Sanskritization is known as a process through which ordinary people become familiar with concepts that are found in Sanskrit literature. However, his interpretation has been that through this, the people have been in a way brainwashed into Sanskrit literatures. Um, I think a better interpretation of the process should be that these Bhikshavritti people, through performances of their art forms, have made ordinary people familiar with the rich concepts in Sanskrit literature. And in a way, I don't know how appropriate this term should be. It is a form of democratization of knowledge. In an oral tradition, in an oral culture, uh, one one way of democratizing knowledge has been through stories. Through stories we make people familiar with concepts and the nuances uh, of their concepts. So I think that has been the primary role of Bhikshavritti in the Indian tradition.
In fact, I vividly remember Guruji Ravindra Sharma mentioned that the idea and the effort in our society has always been how do we make Desi into Margi? The sense
Mhm.
of Desi and Margi are two specific senses that you use in the sense of how art gets performed in the country. And हमारा सारा कोशिश ये रहा कि देसी को मार्गी कैसे बनाए. This was a very oft-repeated statement that I heard from Ravindra Sharma ji.
Yes, yes. In
Uh,
fact, I think I should mention here, I don't know how much time we have. I'll just quickly make this point that the book of Natya Shastra, which is called in a way um, as an inspiration to all other art forms. In the introduction, it mentions that the purpose of art, the purpose of Natya is considered to be an all-encompassing art. The purpose of Natya is to reinvigorate the human interest on the issues of dharma and adharma. And so, why drama is performed? So that the people who've come to watch drama become interested in the issues of dharma and adharma, no? For them to be able to develop this capacity, what is dharma and what is adharma. That's the purpose of art. Unfortunately, what we see today, art has probably, I don't know, lost that sense of purpose. I don't know. I'm not an art expert here, but that's, as a common man, I get a sense that today art has been more or less been reduced to manoranjan, entertainment, and the issues of dharma and adharma are largely absent. Uh, I may be wrong in this, but yes. So the primary responsibility of Bhikshavritti people, the performers of various art forms, is to develop a culture in the village where people contemplate on dharma and adharma, and a rich culture of this contemplation is formed. So, for example, I think I can say with much confidence that for thousands of years, the ordinary Indian has been contemplating whether Ram was right when he asked Sita to leave or not. You know, uh, this contemplation on Maryada and uh, whether Ram did the right thing or wrong. This culture of contemplation has been happening for over generations. This has been a strength of the Indian society. This maybe now seems to be little lacking in the way we live.
to a large extent, I was very fortunate to listen to Tijan Bai narrating Ram Katha. And that was actually a lively experience to imagine, say, how she goes about responding to questions posed by audience, and thereby also recreate that very scenario live and get people to involve into the questions of these dharma sankatas that you actually spoke of. Now, there's one point that I thought, see, you were referring to Natya Prayojana, which is about, say, how to create the sense of discernment into people. But each of these is possible only when, say, there is an appropriate environment for the same. And Grama is supposed to be the one that actually created that kind of an environment.
Yes, yes.
And there are attempts to try and see, today we speak of urbanizing villages or rurbanizing villages to provide with latest technologies in the villages. The point of in what manner can we imagine, say, repopulating villages is a question that I thought I should certainly raise in the context of our discussion, given that I recently heard that Xi Jinping seems to have said that they are going to change their strategy of development to repopulate villages. So I'm not too sure whether, say, that they do or not, but certainly, say, India has a better kind of imagination as to what ought to be done. If at all we need to revitalize a village. And I thought, say, the way in which we can look at this would be great, because when the sense of past that you referred to, that these Bhikshavritti people created, if it can actually be reinvigorated, when one need not by any means consider that their own ancestors are to be treated as somebody who have actually been looked down upon, but certainly they have had their own kind of greatness, and each one is proud of their ancestry. Then you do have a positive kind of a way in which you can as well see how you can move forward in a manner where you can actually accomplish a yajna towards the attainment of moksha, the purpose of which you would actually find is at the core of, say, the performance of a yajna.
Yes. So I think very, very briefly, because I think we're running out of time. In the Natya Shastra, there are two things I want to respond to. In the Natya Shastra, there's a chapter on the playhouse, the Krida Sthal. In my opinion, a village should be seen as a Krida Sthal, a playhouse. As we know, the purpose of playhouse is to provide an enabling environment for the play, the Natya to actually happen, for the audience to get immersed into issues raised in the Natya. And I think a village should be seen as a playhouse which provides an enabling environment for people to get immersed into natyas and other art forms and deliberate on their content. That's one. The second question, how to repopulate the village, I don't know. I think in our lifetime we will not see that happening. I think in our lifetime we will see the villages getting empty, more and more empty. However, we will see few people, a very little minority, who have seen the world. They've seen whatever has to be seen, been to America, Europe, big Indian cities, Delhi, Bombay, and they've seen the world, and they have concluded that returning to the village is a better option. We do see such people in our generation. Their numbers are very small, they're minuscule, but I'm sure more such people will be there. However, the large population is still very eager to move out of the village, and their eagerness is justified. I am certainly not suggesting that it's an unfounded eagerness. So I don't know, frankly, the answer to this question: how to repopulate the village. I don't know that.
I think, say, it will be good if we can as well end this discussion by talking about the concept of right to serve that you discuss in your thesis.
The right to be served, yes. in Jajmani system, in a very simple way, can be defined as a system which provides you the right to be served. So as a if I am a potter and I am making pots for my jajmans, uh, I am a good potter if I'm dedicating my life in making pots to serve the needs of the other jajmans and not worrying about anything else. Then I demand that other people provide me with my other needs, my food needs, my clothing needs, my aesthetic needs. So I have a right to be served by other people because I have dedicated my life in making good pots to fulfill the needs of my jajmans. So this, of course, needs better formulation, but that's something which uh, our teacher, your and my teacher Navjyoti sir, used to bring to our notice that Jajmani system, uh, establishes the right to be served as a fundamental human right.
Maybe I'd like to say, conclude this session of ours, which has been a very enlightening session, by saying that the idea of right to be served as a kind of fundamental notion should probably be complemented by one's own sense to say that I must have a right to serve. And this mutual sense of right to be served and right to serve would actually go back to a very interesting traditional formulation of how does one actually feel like being a dasa when one speaks of Swarajya and being Swatantra. So there's a traditional shloka that comes to my mind. I thought we could as well end with this. It says, this is in the Advaitin sense. And for the Vaishnavas, they actually desire that their ultimate goal is to be Krishna Dasa, to be at the feet of Lord Krishna. So this shloka goes, Dasohamiti ya buddhihi, purvamasi janardane, dakaro apahrita stena, gopi vastrapaharina. In the sense that when I actually considered myself to be your dasa, you have been so kind that you have actually stolen the dakara. So dasoham becomes soham. That is the sense in which one actually relates to. And how is this done? The way in which, say, Lord Krishna has stolen the vastras of Gopikas. So with this, we could possibly say continue these kind of discussions in future, and also think about the question about how do we repopulate villages with sufficient seriousness, because the village as a contemplative space, as you mentioned, requires to be necessarily, say, recovered.
Yes. So I would say the question to think about is the old question. It's not a new question, which is how to establish dharma in our times. And in that question, we will have many other questions, including how to repopulate the village. But the primary question is of dharma sthapna, how to establish dharma in our times.
Very well. Thank you, Dr. Harsh.
Thank you.
And let's hope to have more discussions in future.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaskar.